September 11th, 2015. In the heart of Mecca, as pilgrims gathered for prayer beneath storm-darkened skies, a 1,350-ton crane, supposedly one of the world's safest, came crashing down with unimaginable force. Overnight, the holiest site in Islam became the stage for a catastrophe. 111 dead, nearly 400 injured, and a question that still haunts those who witnessed it. How could the Mecca crane catastrophe happen in a place built for faith and safety? Was it an act of God, or a disaster hiding a fatal human error? The truth behind that single decision, and the chaos it unleashed, starts now. Thunder rolled over Mecca as dusk approached, but it wasn't the rain that set danger in motion. Meteorological reports clocked wind gusts at nearly 25 miles per hour, strong enough to whip sand and debris across the marble courtyards. Above the sacred ground, the skyline bristled with cranes. The Grand Mosque had become the world's largest construction zone, a $26 billion expansion project, racing to accommodate 2 million pilgrims for the coming Hajj. Site schematics from 2015 showed dozens of cranes packed around the mosque's perimeter, their booms overlapping like the spars of a crowded harbor. The Liebherr LR 11350 stood among them, its main boom towering high, not lowered as safety guidelines would demand when storms threaten. The site's congestion left little margin for error. Operators navigated a maze of steel, each machine hemmed in by the next, with precious little space to maneuver or secure equipment quickly. Eyewitnesses described the sky turning yellow-gray as the sandstorm intensified. Sheets of dust swept through the colonnades, reducing visibility and coating machinery in grit. The wind pressed laterally against every exposed structure. For a crane with its boom raised, each gust delivered a force measured in tons. The LR 11350, designed to lift the weight of 7 blue whales, now faced a different test, resisting the sideways shove of the storm. Construction managers had been warned that crowded sites amplify risk. Multiple cranes in close proximity can block safe stowage, complicate emergency procedures, and obscure lines of responsibility. On that Friday, the perimeter of the Grand Mosque was a forest of steel, each crane a potential hazard if the weather turned. As the wind built, the stage was set. The external pressures, natural and man-made, were converging, priming the site for disaster. At 5:10 p.m., a sound like tearing metal cut through the air above the Grand Mosque. The Liebherr LR 11350, its boom still raised against the storm, began to tip. CCTV footage later confirmed the sequence. The crane's massive arm wavered, then lurched, as the wind forced its center of gravity past the point of no return. Steel cables snapped, echoing like gunshots across the marble. In seconds, the boom and counterweights, together weighing hundreds of tons, plunged downward. The impact shattered the mosque's roof, sending slabs of marble and twisted rebar crashing into the prayer corridor below. Worshippers who had knelt in silence were thrown into chaos. Survivors recall a deafening roar, followed by darkness and dust. One pilgrim described hearing thunder, then feeling the floor tremble before the ceiling collapsed. Another said, "It sounded like the end of the world." Debris rained down across a wide swath of the courtyard. The crane's boom sliced through ornate columns and scattered prayer rugs, scattering shoes and personal belongings across blood-stained marble. Many victims were struck mid-prayer, unable to react in time. The force of the collapse left bodies pinned beneath steel, while others struggled to breathe amid choking dust and the crush of panicked crowds. In the confusion, cries for help mixed with the blare of alarms. First responders rushed in, weaving between fallen beams and dazed survivors. The mosque, meant to be a sanctuary, had become a scene of devastation. Within moments, 111 lives were lost, and nearly 400 more were injured. For those inside, the boundary between sacred space and disaster had vanished in an instant. The Liebherr LR 11350 is not just a piece of heavy machinery. In the world of construction, It stands as a symbol of precision and power. A crawler crane engineered to lift 1,350 metric tons, or roughly the weight of 7 blue whales. Its main boom, when fully extended, reaches over 220 meters into the sky, rivaling the height of some of the world's tallest landmarks. The base rides on massive, tracked crawlers, distributing the crane's weight across a wide footprint to prevent sinking or tipping, even on soft ground. Central to its stability is a carefully balanced system of counterweights. These are not mere ballast. Each block is calculated to offset the enormous forces generated when the boom swings or lifts. The crane's design relies on a principle as old as the lever. Every load, every movement, must be counteracted by equal and opposite force. The LR-11-350's engineers built in generous safety margins, anticipating the unpredictable, gusts of wind, shifting ground, sudden stops. But the real key to safety lies in the geometry of the boom. When lowered, the boom presents a narrow profile to the wind, allowing air to flow past with minimal resistance. Raised, it becomes a vertical wall, catching every gust like a sail. Manufacturer manuals are explicit. In high winds, the boom must be brought down to the ground. This is not a suggestion. It's a line drawn by physics. The slewing ring, a massive bearing at the crane's base, allows the superstructure to rotate. It's engineered to handle enormous vertical loads, but lateral forces, especially those from wind, can push it beyond its limits if the boom is not secured. On paper, the LR-11-350 should be nearly impossible to topple when operated within its design envelope. Every component, from the steel lattice of the boom to the hydraulics controlling its movement, is rated for far greater stresses than normal operation would ever demand. Yet all of this engineering depends on one thing: adherence to procedure. The physics of the machine are unyielding. Ignore the rules, and even the most advanced crane becomes vulnerable. The next moments would reveal what happens when those margins are erased. The collapse of the LR-11-350 was not a mystery of steel or wind, but a failure of judgment on the ground. The crane's boom, left raised in defiance of manufacturer warnings, became a vertical sail. Each gust delivered a force that multiplied with the height and length of the boom, testing the limits of even the most robust engineering. Site supervisors faced a hard truth: the crane's design could absorb only so much before physics took over. But warnings had been issued. Saudi regulators, weeks before the disaster, documented risks tied to unsecured cranes and urged contractors to implement stricter wind safety protocols. Yet, on that Friday, no formal order was recorded to lower the LR-11-350's boom. Operators found themselves boxed in by a thicket of machinery. The site's dense layout made it nearly impossible to lower the boom without shifting other cranes first. A logistical nightmare, with the Hajj deadline looming. Some accounts suggest that pressure to keep the project moving discouraged any pause for safety. In the hours before the storm, weather advisories called for caution, but site management failed to coordinate a shutdown. The boom remained upright, presenting the worst possible profile to the wind. Ground conditions added to the risk. Soil stability reports from the site noted patches of soft, waterlogged sand beneath the crawler tracks. While not the root cause, this uneven footing reduced the margin for error. As the wind pressed laterally, the crane's center of gravity inched toward disaster. The slewing ring, designed for vertical loads, became the weak point under this sideways assault. Internal safety memos and inspection records remain sealed from public view, but the pattern is clear. The manufacturer's manual left no room for interpretation. In high winds, the boom must be lowered. The absence of action was not an oversight. It was a fatal lapse. Saudi courts would later attribute the catastrophe to human error and ignored protocols, not a defect of the machine. The LR-11-350's collapse was preventable. It happened because the chain of responsibility broke, and a line was crossed from risk to recklessness. The moment the crane struck, the Grand Mosque was transformed from a sanctuary into a disaster zone. Hundreds of worshippers, many in the final moments of Friday prayer, were caught beneath falling stone, steel, and shattered glass. Survivors describe confusion and terror as the lights flickered and the air filled with dust. A Bangladeshi pilgrim recalled, "My friends stumbled during prayer. Then the ceiling above just fell, and everything turned black." First responders moved in quickly, guided by shouts and the glow of emergency lights. Medics and civil defense crews picked their way through debris, lifting twisted beams and broken marble with bare hands. The sacred floor, usually swept clean for prayer, was now slick with water, blood, and scattered shoes. Some rescuers worked barefoot, unwilling to desecrate the site, while others used microphones and cameras to search for signs of life beneath the rubble. The injured came from across the Muslim world: Indonesia, Pakistan, Egypt, India, Iran, and more. Many had saved for years to make this pilgrimage, only to find themselves searching for loved ones in the chaos. Hospitals in Mecca and Jeddah overflowed within hours. Families gathered in waiting rooms, clutching lists of the missing, hoping for news. For some, the search ended in tearful reunions. For others, it meant identifying bodies in crowded morgues. The toll was immediate and staggering: 111 dead, 394 wounded. Some survivors would spend weeks in intensive care, facing amputations or permanent disability. The trauma extended far beyond physical wounds. For many, the memory of that day, of prayers interrupted by disaster, of strangers becoming rescuers, would never fade. In the days ahead, the world would search for answers, but in those first hours, the only certainty was loss. King Salman's decree came swiftly. Within hours of the collapse, the Saudi bin Laden Group, the kingdom's largest construction conglomerate, was suspended from all new public contracts. Senior executives found their travel privileges revoked, passports seized at airports and border checkpoints. A special investigative committee, drawing from the Ministry of Interior and the Grand Mosque's own administration, began collecting evidence and interviewing site supervisors. By the following summer, the case reached criminal court. 14 defendants, engineers, site managers, and safety officers stood accused of negligence and failing to follow mandatory safety protocols. The prosecution's argument was blunt. Manufacturer manuals and regulatory guidelines were clear, yet the LR-11 350's boom was left raised during high winds. Court filings cited the absence of a formal order to stow the crane, despite weather advisories and previous warnings from labor authorities. The trial unfolded behind closed doors. While the public clamored for transparency, official statements filtered out in fragments. No member of the bin Laden family itself faced indictment. Of the 14 charged, most were middle managers or technical staff. The verdict: a collective fine of 20 million rials, about $5.3 million US, and brief jail terms for a handful of individuals. Several non-citizen employees were deported after serving their sentences. Appeals followed, and some sentences were reduced or suspended altogether on grounds of insufficient criminal intent. For many, the outcome stung. Survivors and families of victims voiced anger at what they saw as lenient punishment, especially given the scale of loss. Editorials and papers from Cairo to Jakarta questioned whether justice had been served, or whether powerful interests had shielded themselves behind layers of bureaucracy. The bin Laden Group weathered the storm, resuming government work within 2 years. The fines, while large on paper, were a fraction of the company's annual revenue. In the end, the machinery of accountability ground to a halt, not with sweeping reform, but with a handful of fines, a few short sentences, and a city forever changed. The Grand Mosque expansion was the largest construction project in Saudi history, a $26 billion commitment to future-proof the heart of Islam. Project planners faced an unforgiving timetable. Millions of pilgrims would soon arrive for Hajj, and every delay carried the risk of overcrowded courtyards and global scrutiny. In 2015, the skyline around the Kaaba bristled with cranes, each one a marker of urgency and ambition. Planning officials debated how to balance rapid progress against the realities of site safety. Some argued that meeting strict deadlines justified round-the-clock work, even as the site grew more congested and difficult to manage. Budget overruns and contractual penalties loomed over every decision. In the rush to expand capacity for 2 million worshippers, the culture on site began to favor speed over caution, a calculation that redefined acceptable risk and left little room for error. Across the globe, the story repeats. Milwaukee, 1999. The crane called Big Blue was tasked with lifting a 450-ton roof section in winds gusting over 20 miles per hour. Engineers underestimated the force at elevation. The crane's boom, acting as a sail, toppled. 3 ironworkers lost their lives. New York City, 2008. A tower crane on East 51st Street collapsed during a rigging operation. The crew used a synthetic sling not rated for the load. The stabilizing collar failed, sending the crane crashing through buildings. 7 people were killed, including a pedestrian walking to work. Seattle, 2019. Contractors dismantling a tower crane removed key bolts too soon, violating manufacturer instructions. The mast buckled, falling onto a busy street below. 2 ironworkers and 2 people in passing cars died. Each disaster traced back to the same route. Warnings ignored, procedures bypassed, safety sacrificed for speed or convenience. The pattern is not unique to Mecca. It is a global problem, paid for in human lives. On September 11, 2015, a 1,350-ton Liebherr crane collapsed at the Grand Mosque in Mecca, killing 111 people and injuring 394 more. The official investigation found that high winds and an unsecured raised boom were the direct causes, but also cited ignored safety protocols and prior warnings about site conditions. Despite charges against 14 individuals and a $5.3 million fine, questions remain about the transparency of the inquiry and whether all responsible parties faced consequences. Some regulatory documents have never been made public. The Mecca disaster is not isolated. Similar collapses in Milwaukee, New York, and Seattle all point to a global pattern of preventable errors. Today, massive construction projects continue to push deadlines, often at the expense of basic safety. The record is clear. This was not an act of God, but a failure of human oversight. Every life lost that day was the price of avoidable neglect, and a warning that safety, not speed, must guide every decision where lives are at stake.